Benjamin Lay was a little person who once kidnapped the kid of a slave owner to protest slavery. He was like, if y'all can kidnap people's children, I can kidnap yours. It's cool when they do it. It's a problem when I do it. He gave them back, so before you guys start complaining, like... Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Alfred Smalls, and today we're going to be doing a dwarfism history deep dive into one of my favorite people, Benjamin Lay. Before I start though, just two quick things. One, I'm wearing this shirt in honor of Benjamin Lay, and before you ask, what does a gremlin have to do with Benjamin Lay? As you will see, Benjamin Lay was a rebel, he was a radical, he was an icon, a legend, the moment, etc. So I just felt it was fitting to wear a shirt of someone who was equally as disruptive. I think they're cute. Sure, were they a little messy? Aren't we all though? Also, before we start, well, I'm tweaking. I just want to go over my beverage selection. So I have coffee, just a little bit of vanilla creamer in it, and that's it. And then I have coffee iced with just a little bit of vanilla creamer, that's it. Some water. I lost the straw that it came with. Oh, actually, I remember where it is now. Never mind. So our story takes place in the 1700s. Oh, hold on. Guys, why aren't you subscribed? I really think you should subscribe to this channel so that we can all have a fun time together. Ow, 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 ow. Anyways, as I was saying, you should subscribe so that you can get all of these videos that I make, whether they be coherent or chaotic or well-rounded and structured. But you should subscribe so you can get all the videos that I post right into your inbox, and you can do that by hitting subscribe and then hitting the bell notification icon. You guys know, everyone always rambles about that. I don't need to do it for you. And also, make sure you check out my bio. There are some devastating fires affecting thousands of innocent people in California, so I have put links below. Really appreciate it. Guys, we're almost at like 6,000 subscribers. That's crazy. Okay. Serious. So our story starts in the 1600s with the birth of Benjamin Lay. Now, as someone who used to hate history, because when I was a kid I was literally like, why do I care about people having wars and fighting and killing and ravaging each other? Like, it's not very fun to learn about necessarily. It's because of people like Benjamin Lay that now I love history, because I just feel like, without sounding, I don't know if this would be a parasocial relationship, but I have a crush on Benjamin Lay a little bit. I think most men are very underwhelming, no offense. Benjamin Lay though was a man. He was a man. He just stood his ground, he stood on business, he was empathetic, he was kind to women, children, people of color, he was an animal lover. I just feel like we would have gotten along, and I would have been like twirling my hair every time he walked by. Alas, he was born like 400 years ago, so can't really do that, can I? But when I first heard about Benjamin Lay, I was so inspired by his drive just to be a good person and to bring people together. He fought for the freedoms and the rights of all different types of people, both human and animals, and I just think that's a really admirable thing, especially given the time when things like owning other humans was the norm. We'd like to say now, oh, people didn't know back then, stuff like that was wrong. Don't blame people back then for believing in slavery. We can't use modern standards and put them on older people from older generations. No, I can. Yeah, I do. He was calling people out not only for their hypocrisy, especially religious people who owned slaves, but he was also pro-animal rights, pro-equality between genders. He also wrote at length about abolishing things like capital punishment. And specifically in this video, we're going to be talking about his fight to see slavery abolished, which was a lifelong mission that he had. And he eventually saw it come true, literally right before he died, but some things take time. Benjamin Lay was born in 1682 in Essex, England, to two average-height parents, and that's pretty common for people in the dwarfism community. 80% of people with dwarfism are born to average-height parents, which means that most of us grow up in families and have siblings who are average height. That was also the case for Benjamin Lay. He also had a brother who was older than him, who was also average height, and his parents, although they didn't really have that much of a formal education, they did provide him with a basic education, but really more so instilled in him that to be a good person, you know, they were like, you should want to do good things and be kind and a good person to other people. Thankfully, because a lot of y'all's parents need to tell you that. It is okay to be a good person and to strive to be a good person. You don't all have to be wretched, intolerable, cranky, agitating people. I really am tweaking today, I would say. He was a third-generation Quaker and lived in a small town, and he always strived for adventure, which is why I love Benjamin Lay so much. He said, y'all are boring. When he was a teenager, he started working on his brother's farm as a farmhand, but eventually he became an apprentice glove maker, which also bored him. So in his early 20s, he decided to become a sailor. Can you imagine a captain of a ship being like, "Ahoy, mateys," and then seeing a little person and being like, "How did you get here?" Nevertheless, Benjamin Lay soon started to embark on a 10 to 11-year adventure around the world by ship. And he learned so much as a sailor, not just about, how to work on a ship, but also just about the world around him, because as the ship would travel around the world, he would meet different people on these ships, whether they be fellow sailors or whether they be enslaved people. And he would listen to their stories, unlike other people, and he would form friendships with these enslaved people that were being transported like objects and herded like cattle. And it really was evident to him that the idea of slavery was crazy. He was like, "Y'all think this is normal? It's not. Fix it now." He started to write lots on this boat while he was sailing, describing the stories and the peoples that he was encountering and hearing, and some of that included the stories of enslaved individuals. He would write countless books, over 200 in fact, about things like, again, abolishing the slave trade, abolishing capital punishments, gender equality. He also took up vegetarianism because he didn't believe that animals should be harmed in order for him to nourish his body, and that's something he practiced all throughout his life. So after he was a sailor, he came back to London, now in his early 30s, a new man with a new outlook on life, new experiences, and this is when he really became the menace that we know and love him to be. This was because he had gained so much knowledge into the horrors of the slave trade, and then comes back and everyone else is acting like that's not a big deal. Because the slave trade was in full effect, so many products that people would buy and sell were products of the slave trade, and Benjamin Lay, he wanted none of that. He would end up starting to make his own clothes. He refrained from buying anything that was the product of the slave trade. And he was known for basically going around town and calling out the wealthy for their abuse of enslaved people. He particularly had a thing for Quakers who were wealthy and greedy and abusing money and power, because he was like, that literally contradicts our faith. And you know how people use religion sometimes to justify horrible things throughout history, and he was like, So he very quickly became the town crazy. He was just not letting people get away with, "They can't keep getting away with it." He just did not believe in standing by and watching people abuse the poor or enslave other individuals or use their faith to justify horrendous atrocities. And he was making sure it was known, despite being a little person, despite having a hunchback, despite using a cane to walk. He was like, "Ain't nothing gonna stop me." Now, up until this point, Benjamin Lay was single, and in his own words, he didn't even know that there was other people like him, as in other people with dwarfism, because especially back then, it was very rare for people with dwarfism to meet other little people unless they were born directly in their families. Nevertheless, one day, Benjamin Lay met his partner in crime and future wife, Sarah Lay, who was the polar opposite of Benjamin Lay, which is why their love story is so beautiful to me. Opposites really do attract. She was very popular in her community for being a devout Quaker, a teacher, a leader. She was very played by the rules. And then you have Benjamin Lay, like, raging out on people. Fellow Quakers he was crashing out on. So you have two opposite sides of the same coin. Two little people who both lived different lives, but eventually found each other. And Benjamin Lay described her as being his other half, and I think it's so beautiful that they found each other. They had similar medical, issues and complications. They had a similar form of dwarfism, and again, it was so rare for little people to be able to connect in that way, let alone be compatible romantically. So they ended up getting married, and when you got married back then, you had to get a certificate. Like, the Quaker community had to sign off, and he ended up going to Boston, and the Quaker community in Boston wrote back to his, because he was situated in London, they wrote back to the London Quakers, and they were like, "Hey, one of y'all's boys, Benjamin Lay, wants to get married, and we're right about to sign his little certificate to approve it, but is there anything we should know about him?" And they were like, "Oh no, he's not, he's debt-free, but he is kicked out of all of our Quaker meetings because he keeps calling us weirdos and freaks and horrible people for owning slaves, and we don't really like him, and he's kind of low-key not allowed to come to our church sessions anymore because of that. And the Quakers in Boston were like, got it. They did sign off on a certificate of marriage though, and him and Sarah got married. And they ended up moving to Barbados, where, yes, that's where Rihanna is from, because they thought it would be better than living in London, where their fellow Quakers were being awful people. They just really wanted to live around people who they thought shared the same values and beliefs they had. And there was a huge Quaker community in Barbados at the time, actually. But the problem is that they were even worse than the people who were living in England. When I tell you, truly hell on earth. It was like 9 out of 10 people who lived in Barbados at the time were enslaved. I mean, it was just awful. The things that they saw and witnessed there. I mean, they used to have slave owners who were routinely beating their slaves on specific days of the week to ensure that they were too weak to escape or retaliate. And over time, Benjamin and Sarah, they set up a shop there, a merchant shop, and continued their efforts to befriend enslaved people, because both of them believed that those were people and that you should show kindness and empathy and help them to your best of your ability. They opened up their homes to people who were enslaved. Like the one day of the week that they would get off, they would come to visit Benjamin and Sarah, and there'd be hundreds of enslaved people who were coming to them for food and education and comfort and shelter. So these were their friends, and they were watching their friends get violently brutalized every day of the week. And the Quakers in the Barbados were like not having Benjamin and Sarah's activism. They were like, we will kill y'all. So unfortunately, Benjamin and Sarah didn't even live there 2 years, because they were literally about to probably be, I guess I should say, unalived, because I don't know the censorship on YouTube. But yeah, the Quakers there were not having it. They were violent, horrific, awful people that are probably burning in the depths of hell. In one instance, Benjamin and Sarah had a friend that ended up hanging themselves before their weekly beating, because they just couldn't endure the hardships and the abuse that they faced from being enslaved. And I mean, that was their friends. Imagine... I mean, truly, this was like the worst case scenario for treatment of enslaved individuals. It was way worse than they had ever seen. It was way worse than some other parts of the world. And it was just all around a truly horrible, evil, vile, sick, disgusting place. So they eventually moved out of Barbados, and that's when they moved to Philadelphia, because there was the promise of a new forming community that was built on freedom. And although it was true that the rate of enslaved individuals was much lower, people still owned slaves, and that was still very much the norm, and that was not good enough for Benjamin and Sarah. So they continued their efforts to educate fellow Quakers and the community on the horrors of the slave trade and why it should not be allowed, specifically in the Quaker community, and that people weren't a fan of them still. And it was mainly Benjamin. He was the one who was like adamant of making it his entire personality, and good for him. This is where Benjamin Lay not only befriended Ralph Sandiford, but also Benjamin Franklin, which I think is just a random friendship. And I mean, they were buddies. That was a bromance. Benjamin Lay and Benjamin Franklin, they loved each other. But at this point, Benjamin Lay had spent decades kindly educating people on the horrors of the slave trade and why they shouldn't believe that that was okay and normal. Now he was determined to show slave owners no peace and to disrupt every aspect of their lives. So he started doing public acts of protests to antagonize them, in hopes that that would do more than just kindly educating people. So some of those acts of protests include, he would go to they would call them meeting houses. They were kind of like their churches, so a sacred place, let's just say. He would go to their services and wait till they were like halfway through, and then stand up and start yelling at people about how horrible they were for owning slaves, like, you're a horrible person, and you're a horrible person. In one instance, he even sprayed fake blood onto the faces of people who were in the meeting house, and yeah, they didn't like that very much. In the middle of winter, he would lay outside of the meeting house, so people had to walk by him or over him as they left, and he would like lay in the snow without proper clothing. So people would be like, Benjamin, where are your clothes? You're gonna get sick. And he's like, where are your slaves' clothes? He was big on calling people out for their hypocrisy, which I think is important. And although he never had kids himself, he loved kids. He would oftentimes spend his free time at schools for Quaker children or underprivileged children and just read to them or give stuff away to them. So all of the kids loved him. And in one instance, his neighbors who owned slaves recently had purchased a 10-year-old African girl. And Benjamin was trying to explain to them how messed up it was to split up a family like that and enslave a child. And the neighbors were like, we don't see the problem with it. So Benjamin Lee was like, bet. And his neighbors had a kid, that loves Benjamin. So one day when the parents were distracted, Benjamin was like, hey kid, you want to come over to my house for cookies? And the kid was like, sure, why not? So Benjamin and the kid take off for his house, and the parents are like, wait, where did little Johnny go? And they start freaking out because they're like, our kid's been kidnapped. Oh god. And they freak out, and Benjamin lets them freak out for a few hours, and then he brings them back. The kid's fine. The kid's like, we love Benjamin. And the parents are like, little Johnny's back. And Benjamin's like, see how horrible it is to be split up? Wonder how the family of a child they're enslaving feels right now. He was just really messy, and him and his wife ended up moving into a cave because they didn't want to even live around slave owners anymore. So Benjamin Lay set up a whole house inside of a cave with custom furniture. He had his own beehive. He had a bookshelf that he custom built with hundreds of books. He spun his own clothing material so he could make his own clothes, so he didn't have to buy any clothing that was made by enslaved people. It was just a little quaint life him and his wife had, and he would march like 10 miles into town and 10 miles back every day with his little cane to yell at some slave owners, yell at some rich people, you know, just the normal things. Unfortunately, his wife did pass, and this was kind of the beginning to the end for Benjamin Lay because they had spent decades together. It was really his companion, and again, he didn't know any other little people, so this was really the only person who connected with him on that level. And it was a rough time for Benjamin Lay for sure. This was later on in his life, and nevertheless, he did keep fighting for change because it was his lifelong mission, and his wife's as well, to see the abolishment of slavery. And he just kept going in harder and harder on his community to see if there could be any changes that he could make. And again, he was a writer, and he ended up writing a book. The title was literally like, to all of you horrible people who own slaves, how dare you? You are awful people, the garbage and the scum of the earth. You evil, vile, sick, demented people, how dare you? It was just a very long title that was basically calling out anybody who owned slaves. And guess who published it for him? Because all the other publishers in town were like, bro, we're not. Turn it around. Back it up. Benjamin Franklin ended up publishing the book for him. And Benjamin Lay, because Benjamin Franklin, which y'all don't talk about enough, Benjamin Franklin also enslaved 2 people, and originally they were going to stay enslaved even after Benjamin Franklin died. And Benjamin Lay is the one who convinced Franklin to redo his will to ensure the freedom of his slaves. And ideally, obviously, Franklin would have just freed his slaves when he was alive. Alas, the most that Lay could do is convince him to free them post his death. And Benjamin Franklin would march over to Lay's little cave in the woods after Sarah died, and they would just have tea together and talk. And I think, again, if this were ever a movie, I think it would be so cute to see the friendship between Benjamin Franklin and Benjamin Lay, 2 very different people with 2 very different statuses in society, forming a bond and having tea in the little cave. I just imagine an average height Benjamin Franklin sipping his little teacup on top of like a miniature chair. In his 70s though, Benjamin did start to slow down, and walking 20 miles a day into town wasn't always possible, and he ended up spending a lot of time at home alone, making tea, making clothes, tending to his garden, his beehive, until eventually he found himself ill and in his final days. And that's when someone from town, one of his fellow Quakers, knocked on his door one day, and he was like, so, you know, we've been talking about slavery and thinking about the things you said about how wrong it is, you know, and not to say you told us and inspired us to stop it, but we are going to probably end up canceling that. Yeah, we're starting to outlaw slavery. And Benjamin Lay was like, finally! But no, he really did. He was like, oh good, finally y'all came to your senses, now I can die in peace. And die in peace he did. He ended up dying shortly after being informed by that Quaker that Quakers were going to start outlawing slavery within their ranks. And it really created a ripple movement within Quaker communities, not even just in Abington and Philadelphia, but really worldwide. And I think it's really beautiful because he really did, from the very beginning of his, like, in his early 20s, was like, oh yeah, I'm going to see to it that we start making this a norm, that slavery is not considered to be ethically okay or moral in any way. And it was like 55 years later that he ended up seeing his one wish come true, and it's so sad that his wife never got to see that day come, but I'm sure she knew knowing Benjamin and how crazy he was, that eventually that was going to happen. That people were going to realize that he wasn't the town crazy, that he actually was speaking some truth and some sense. And at the time of his passing, he ended up donating all of his estate to schools for Quaker children. I think that's really beautiful as well. During the course of his life, he gave everything he had, emotionally, physically, spiritually, to oppressed groups, from Barbados to England to Philadelphia. Didn't matter where, he was for the people. And even after his death, he gave everything he had to the people as well, to the next generation of Quakers. Again, that's why I'm like, what a beautiful man. What a beautiful man. And that is why I think that we should replace all of the men on dollar bills with Benjamin Lay's face. I think Benjamin Lay's story is so important because I think it teaches us about the power of perseverance and the power of advocating for the right thing, even if people call you crazy. And even if you're the only person in the room fighting for what you believe in, if it's right and if it's the truth, it will eventually be heard and be seen. Again, as I said earlier, there's this misconception that no one knew in history that certain things like enslavement were wrong. But it just goes to show that there are people who did. And I'm sure in 100 years, society and historians are going to look back at our point in history and wonder how so many of us were complacent with the violent things that we put our fellow humans and our world through. I mean, we are so awful to this planet that we were given. We are so awful to fellow humans, to animals, and at a certain point, we've created so many norms that are just truly awful. We've created so many systems of oppression that we're supposed to believe are just a part of humanity. And I'm sure that one day we will look back and we will go, I think that Benjamin Lay deserves his own dollar bill. As a filmmaker and a writer and a dwarfism historian, Benjamin's story is one that I would love to adapt one day. Despite how many dark periods of the story that would have to be actualized on screen, I think it would be worth it to tell the story of fighting for what's right. I think that really is just Benjamin Lay summed up in a nutshell. He knew what he believed in and he stood on business. And he said that everyone deserves equal rights and freedoms and a voice, and he was going to fight for those who were not being allowed that. And I love that for him. I absolutely suggest you go and do a deep dive into Benjamin Lay the moment you click off this video. Make sure you like it though before you leave. And in the caption below, I will go ahead and put some recommendations for books and even live shows that you can see about Benjamin Lay's life. If you're familiar with Mark Pavanelli, he played in Mirror Mirror, the movie. He was in Water for Elephants. He was in Nightmare Alley, and he's one of the most talented and prolific dwarfism actors in Hollywood. And he actually does a one-man show based on Benjamin Lay's life. And the show is doing 2 runs this year that have been announced, one in Philadelphia in a couple weeks, and then one in New York City starting in March, and I think it goes to April, and I'm moving to New York City again in a month, so I'm so excited to go and see it. And I'm definitely going to reach out to the show to see if I can do maybe like an exclusive interview or behind the scenes look or something for you guys. You know I'm nosy. I want to see what they're doing over there. But anyways, thank you so much for listening to me tweak on camera for however long this video is. It is like 11:45 at night. 11:39 at night, sorry. Liar! But I appreciate you spending this time with me and learning more about this awesome part of dwarfism history. And again, I really thank you guys for all the love on this channel. It has been a goal of mine to have a platform like this on YouTube since 2021. I would post videos every week back then, just having so much fun, doing challenges and talking about dwarfism and just like a mix of different type of content, and they would get maybe 50 views. And although it's not about views and stuff, I do like seeing you guys in the comment section. I do like hearing your thoughts and opinions. I do love forming community, so it's been really awesome seeing this channel grow already, and I don't know, I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun too. I'm Aubrey Smalls though. I love you guys so much. Like and subscribe. But until next time, that's all I really have to say. I love ya. Keep going.